Welcome to the Introduction to Digital Humanities. This is Module 1, where we're introducing you to digital humanities around the world. Several countries have been practicing digital humanities for over a decade, and yet the emphasis that different cultures have placed on what they deem important and worthy of digitization or digitalization has varied. A while ago, a spreadsheet was created to upvote what persons deemed significant in terms of projects from their country, and almost every continent made its way on this sheet. What we see really is that over this decade, many of the links are broken, many of the projects perhaps exist elsewhere, but it certainly has given us a sense of what the spread of the kind of work that has been done around the world. So you see really in the case of, for instance, Afghanistan, the creation of an entire digital library of Afghani works published between 1870 and 1930. This is similar to something like the Persian Digital Archive, and this is an image database that contains documents from Iran, Central Asia, and the Indian subcontinent. Similarly, you see something in Japan where the Virtual Institute at this university has basically helped put online things like the Kyoto News Archive, Digital Kabuki Museum, a collection of early Japanese books, and of course things like wood blocks and theater, in addition to clothing and such. So you see really countries allocating funding as well as priority to what they deem as significant. And in the case of, for instance, the National Taiwan University, there is an entire research center of digital humanities that has been established since 2007. So what you're seeing here also is sort of 40 different databases that get created, including the Digital Library of Buddhist Studies, which is spanning, yes, the Chinese-speaking world, but often sort of goes beyond that. Additionally, we're looking at things that are deeply collaborative in nature that require the energy of different countries coming together. And this is something like the Silk Road Project that was also initiated by the British Library. We see in similar terms the way in which certain individuals who are deemed significant around the world, such as Charles Darwin, have had their works be put online. In the case of this project, which has been around since 2006, it's almost been 20 years, and there are almost 1 billion users of this site. So in that regard, some, I think, projects have had more reach than others. Similarly, historically salient is the Medici Archive, which has also been around since the early 1990s. And it sort of has digitized more than 5 million letters. It's an archival corpus. And of course, this is, very significant around the world. In the case of somebody like Tolstoy, this is a crowdsourced site that also seeks to put up every edition of Tolstoy's works. And of course, there are many lovers of Tolstoy around the world, so this would make sense that it is also in Russian and in English. Something like the Digital Library of the Caribbean spans many countries in the Caribbean, and it's again multi-institutional, and it comes about because of that collaboration across these institutions where the region itself gets significance in terms of its collective. In the case of the Global Egyptian Museum, this is a very obviously historically civilizationally significant part of the world, and as you know, the Library of Alexandria, etc., has had a lot of importance in terms of how human history played out. So about 2 million objects from ancient Egypt have been placed in this digital space, and other sort of efforts are on the way. Now, the deal actually is that it's not just about the creation of these projects, which is, of course, significant, but the fact that they really change the nature in which teaching and learning can occur. Without these databases and without these references, it wasn't so easy to access these resources in classrooms. So what we see really is this new way of studying, such as the historical review of the Atlantic slave trade at this website, the Slave Voyages, site. And what we're also seeing, along with the fact that these materials are available to new publics, is that there is a leverage of multilingual affordance. So we're seeing in, for instance, the case of the Digital Benin project, data from over 5,000 objects across 130 plus institutions and 20 countries. Through these sites, what we are able to do is search, filter, study, and view data from different parts that were dispersed. So in the case of the Benin Kingdom, they were dispersed over 20 countries, and a project like Digital Benin allows for us to focus on that collection. So the power of the digital to become globally accessible has made a site such as this one give access to cultural heritage materials from and about African countries. It brings together tens of thousands of digitized photographs, videos, archival documents, maps, interviews, and oral histories in numerous African languages, many of which are contained in thematic galleries and serve as fantastic teaching resources. But what digital humanities has in common across all of these practices is a very generous sharing of tools, and kind of experiments that have succeeded in one place can often be adopted into another. There's a very interesting site by a very famous digital humanities blogger called Miriam Posner, and it's called How Did They Make That? One of the early stories in digital humanities was the collection of tools under a directory. So what you wanted to know was if you had to visualize something in a certain way, or if you wanted to create a database in a certain sense, what are the tools that were available to you? This particular umbrella was captured under something called Project Bamboo, and it has stopped existing in terms of being updated, but it continues to sort of serve as a guide for the kinds of things that you can utilize towards creating digital projects. In Miriam Posner's sense, when she says how do they make that, she divides them really as, and Omeka is of course very, very popular in terms of the tools people are using, but as far as things like mapping and such, she shows you both the tool as well as the example. For instance, looking at something like a very popular tool called Neatline, you would see people who have used it for exhibitions, of course, on their own websites and such. This is something that is taught in universities, so it's easier to implement in classrooms. There is a very interesting living document called DH Around the World, which I'll also share as a resource at the end, where you can look at these listings of projects across countries, across continents. And this is to give you a sense of the fact that this is vibrant, alive, and constantly being updated. One of the most, of course, universally known digital experiments has been the Wiki experiment. And Wiki has had a philosophy of open, and they want to actually link data across that open universe, across languages for all users. So in many ways, it gives us a test case for how we could think about building in terms of classrooms as well as for publics, because of the fact that this success story really has been evolving over time. We see, in addition to that, an experiment like Trove, which comes out of Australia. In Australia, the government really encouraged citizens to help annotate digitization of newspapers, and it has become a very popular project that was essentially funded by the state, but really could not have existed had citizens not annotated in the way they did. Similarly, big institutions such as the Smithsonian in the US also encourage public annotation, and so what we see really is the need for a lot of participation, not only from students or people in universities, but encouraging and inviting users to come and engage with the product, the model, and make it better. In the Indian case, one very early attempt at a historical database was something called the Kamat's historical timeline. And what we haven't seen really since then is the thinking through of history through big data. In a way, its time has not yet come, but the reason for that is because the data sets are not easily available or created or accessible. The hope of good digital humanities work in India would be to see that made possible. And this begs the question of what exists already. And I'm going to walk you through some tools in the Indian context to see how we can compare what perhaps needs to be created or benchmarked with what else exists in the world. So in the Indian case, we see something called InflibNet. Many of you, of course, have access to this. This matters greatly in terms of what historical sources you can easily avail of, especially through libraries in your own colleges or even otherwise. There is also the National Digital Library of India, which was created at IIT Kharagpur. And the fact is that under the One Nation, One Subscription scheme, the government does desire to make available all kinds of information and research in journal articles to general public also. So for that reason, I think it's interesting to look at not just sort of what we think of as our wiki and Google kind of first sources, but going beyond that to also looking at guides, library guides, and perhaps more sort of niche multilingual sources that we don't often think of as our first scholarly stops. This has been something that, of course, is very discipline specific. So you see in the realm of different disciplines, people attempting to unite their information through their own funnels. So for instance, in the case of archaeology, you have this core.tdar. In the case of art history, there's been a very fabulous attempt at MIT to create directories for different subject guides. Of course, books, exist across different libraries, and they also have ways in which they classify information that might be more specific to your needs. But something like a design library might differ from something you're looking at with regards to books. And these are some resources that I'm sharing also on the slide that I hope, you find interesting. As I will show you in the course of, the weeks to come, the social implications of what these public historical interfaces do is to really make available for general public the ability to cross question, to query, and to further research topics that might be of interest to them. This has not just been focused on researchers as much as it really is also on creators. We're very familiar with the world of social media, with the fact that we are all creating all the time in terms of image and audio and text and whatnot, but much more than the individual, it's been the collective putting out there of many, many collections by persons that perhaps has created a bigger repository than what was pre-digital. So for instance, in the larger sort of institutions of the West, like the Library of Congress or the British Library, we're looking really at items in the millions, right? But particularly focused on manuscripts, books, maps, paper, essentially. In the new world of what we can think of as far as the documentation of heritage in the digital, we're seeing a lot of different materials, but really also voices such as personal voices, the way in which, for instance, oral histories of recipes might be documented. They're not always in paper or material terms. And so for that reason, we're looking really at a different idea of what your historical or your basic information sources are, and they're really dominated now by the audiovisual also in some sense. So it's important to kind of expand our idea of how we think through archival sources, and particularly sources that allow us to create in the digital. Of course, Wikimedia has been very, very keen to license in an open fashion a lot of their content, and there's also a particular platform they made called Curationist, which lets you find and discover many of these digital objects. This is also significant, of course, for people looking for Indian data in terms of what exists around the world. The linked open data vision is really that, which is to say any digital object that exists should be available to most users and also should be discoverable. And that would only happen again if it was well documented in some sense. So I'm going to sort of do a little bit of an example here, which is to say, let's say you're looking for information, on Gandhi, and where would you sort of begin probing, this particular search term? Of course, you could go to the National Archives of India. They do have a digital platform. But interestingly, you could also look at other national archives across South Asia. And this is something that we have to be a bit creative about in terms of remembering that there are limited holdings in specific locations, but that doesn't exhaust actually what exists. So please understand that in terms of digital humanities research, you could be really thinking through not just official collections, but really through crowdsourced collections, through born digital archives, and very, very unofficial spaces also in terms of social media and things. There have been many scholarly projects that have been funded by universities across the world. So many of the early efforts of digitizing, particularly, let's say, Sanskrit manuscripts and things, came from funding and scholars abroad. And that information also continues to be freely accessible and in the public domain. But what I think we need to understand is that data is really the raw material of making digital projects. And where we locate that data is a function of our own creativity and our explorations. It exists across many platforms, and in many ways, one should be, fairly creative about looking far and wide for this. But the most important thing to note is the fact that since the pandemic, there has been an understanding that the public has a right to a lot more information in the public domain. And in many ways, the databasing of catalogs has improved. There is a lot more digital publication. And there is also a lot more multilingual scholarship that has been emphasized since the NEP of 2020. So in India, while the field of digital humanities is still young, the excitement around digital tools and what they afford has created a whole new possibility. So whether it's through crowdsourcing of projects or a new curation of data and public culture, inviting public reflection and participation is key. What's even more interesting is that none of these efforts are contained only within universities, and in a sense, it creates a possibility of lifelong learning.